Okay, so we have been listening to about leadership, and we have been looking at leadership in a more general and a broader fashion, from the point of view of organizations, from the point of view of the country, from the point of view of the society. We will now be looking at a more personal level. The more personal level is individually defining my own personal brand. And through that, how can I develop my leadership identity? Now, this is a topic about which we have been discussing at our university for the last couple of years, how to develop it. And I believe this is also a fundamental question for anyone aspiring to be a leader. Now, first, let me ask, what is the difference between a leader and a manager? I think we need to go back. It appears that in definition, 40 years ago maybe, they used to be called administrators. Then they used to be called managers. Now we are calling them leaders. So what's the difference? Because IBA was established 55 years ago, 60 years ago, and it was Institute of Business Administration. CBM came around 25, 30, and LUMS came around 30 years ago, and it's called management science. The new institutes which are coming up are calling them leaders or leadership institutes. So I believe a leader is someone who brings something to the table. A manager is someone who wants to get work out of you. That was the definition through which I started my MBA way back in 1985. Manager is a person who gets work done implicitly through you, the subordinates. Over here, a leader is someone who brings something to the table. And we will be talking about that something to the table in greater detail. But before that, a few quotations. The first one, life is to give and not to take. Actually, I think it is from New Testament. And we have its own version in our Islam also. So life is to give and not to take. Is in New Testament, and हमारे यहाँ भी दीन में कहा जाता है कि देने वाला हाथ लेने वाले से बेहतर होता है. Then, of course, there's this famous quote from John F. Kennedy, which states, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. And you can replace it for the country with the society and with the community and whatnot. But this is actually the essence. It is not about, if I get this position, then I will do this. Typically, people in the organizations are expecting, if I am given the responsibility, then I will perform very well. And the problem is that they don't see that the person who has been selected by the higher management, and that was part of the question a bit earlier, when someone else is given a responsibility, it is because that person was taking initiatives before the responsibility was given. And that is how it happens. So I have come across so many people who are always waiting. पहले मुझे आप position देना, आप मुझे बताएं कितने पैसे मिलेंगे तो मैं ये काम करूं. It never works. At least in the private sector, it is not that way. In private sector, you have to go out and start taking initiatives, and that initiatives determines what you actually eventually get. And therefore, when we look at social leaders, and it is very clear what they have brought to the table. So when you look at Edi, and you know what he was giving. Of course, he also got tremendous amount of donations from the masses. So, but it was not for which he was known. He was known for what he was giving. Similarly, Rothfau, who recently expired, she also was bringing something over here. And I think she started from a single institution, and by the time she expired, there were 75 such institutions throughout the country. Professor Adib Rizvi is a perfect example. I've seen him at 1:30 a.m. in the morning on those stairs of SIUT taking rounds. So what he brings to that table, that is what is important. So you need to give. And of course, when we look at business leaders like Sam Walton, so he was asked in his biography, which was published the year he died actually, in 92. So he was asked, you have been the richest man of the world. What did you give to the community? Because he has not donated half of his wealth like Warren Buffett did for some charity. So what he did, what he said was that I have provided the masses, the people, with the lowest costs possible. So if you think about the savings the people have made through my offerings, it would be a tremendous amount. So, and I'll come to that in a little while. Again, the famous author and consultant Jim Collins. Again, you see what he's bringing to the table. He's bringing that expertise. He's bringing those insights that are defining him in his leadership. And of course, Steve Jobs. The fun, the excitement, the uniqueness, the sleekness of the products. And all his life, he has been aspiring for that beauty, starting with that experiment in calligraphy way back in the 70s, I think. So, what do I bring to the table? That is known as your value proposition. That is known as a brand. And once you have identified what you are bringing to the table, then the three defining things, and I would like to thank Mr. Ijaz Wase for giving such brief description. How do you develop your brand? Be seen, be heard, be read. As simple as that. Just three small sentences. But first of all, how do you develop that value proposition that you are going to bring to the table? So we have Malcolm Gladwell telling us it is at least 10,000 hours of work, at least, to gain the initial level of expertise. I think there are some other figures bending about. I believe for be able to bring something to the table, it will require much more than that. So when we look at Indus Hospital over there, 1,500-bed hospital to be, Dr. Abdul Bari had already clocked in maybe 40,000 hours of work before he established that hospital. So that developing that value proposition that will define your brand is very important. And once you have come up with your own value proposition, Jim Collins has a different value proposition, Sam Walton had a different one, Steve Jobs had a different one, Bill Gates has a different one, and you pick up anyone. So today we saw the exciting story of the international IBL. So what they bring to the table, that is what is important. So when proudly displaying TCF and so on and so forth. So now what is meant by be seen? So first of all, we have to develop that value proposition. It may take maybe several tens of thousands of hours. And then you have to ask, once that value proposition is there, is it visible? Is your giving visible? What do you mean by giving visible? To be seen does not mean that each day you will have a status update and a picture change on Facebook and your picture is splashing. That is not be seen. It is your work, your value proposition that must become visible. For that, you have to create concrete examples. You must have something to show, something concrete which people will be talking about, and that part I'll be coming in a little. So there needs to be some concrete examples of something that you have done, and we call that in change management small wins. So you start with the small wins. Never plan for that big bang, big intervention which is going to mesmerize everyone. No, that is not the way. You build your contribution one step at a time with the small wins posted as you are moving towards where you are going. No one has the time to wait for umpteen months before you will unveil that wonderful thing. So there needs to be concrete examples, there needs to be contributions, and these should be small wins. And of course, those small wins will eventually lead to that great contribution. And then you should be seen while you are doing that, that whether you are a role model, because this is what you are giving. So actually, a leader will be spinning off several other leaders like him. And these spin-offs of your will be by being a role model that is worthy of emulation, with the character, with the ethics, which will actually impress upon those who are followed that this is worth following example. And of course, just being a role model is not enough. You need to do that hand-holding. You need to do that mentorship. You need to give that small nudge here, a guidance there, and a lead there. And developing those leads, developing those positions where someone else can shine better than you. And that is what a leader is all about. And the voice that leader is saying, it should be dependable. If he says he will do that, he will do that. So, are you being seen as that? Does your organization see you as an advisor for such and such thing? Because you are expert in that particular area. Do you know that you are expert in a certain area for which you will be consulted by that organization? I'm not saying outside consulting, even inside consulting. Would someone come to you and ask, please tell me how this can be done? Are you perceived as someone with open doors who will be willing to come out and help you and handhold you to that next step? So this needs to be seen. So there were three parts of developing your personal brand. The first is be seen. And what needs to be seen? Not your pictures on. Of course, they will also help later on. But it is not that. So when you think of Adib Rizvi, when you think of Adi, when you think of Sam Walton, when you think of Steve Jobs, they were not after these pictures. They were not after these media positions. So it was their work which was being seen. It was their concrete examples that they have set which was being seen. And the second thing is, of course, be heard. And very easily, it means, does the word of mouth about you precedes you? When you meet someone, does that someone say, yes, I have heard of you? Now, that is being heard. Of course, I'm speaking over here, you are hearing me. This is one of the things which I mentioned in. But the more, because there are so many ways to come to a stage and speak, but actually being heard by the people who have been mentored by you, people who have been led by you, who appreciate you is the word that needs to be heard. So does the word of mouth precede you? Is your target network buzzing about you? Does an issue arise in that target network and people say that, yes, such and such person needs to be contacted regarding this? Does your name come up when the value you represent is being discussed elsewhere? That's actually the being heard, your value proposition being heard. Are you listened to at conferences? Do you make people sleep when you are speaking at a conference or at a meeting? Do you have something new that you can actually say at a particular point? Can you come up with a new articulation that is near and dear to the heart of the audience? That is being listened to, not, it's one step ahead of being heard, but that's actually interesting. So you need to be interesting, you need to be insightful, you need to be out of the box, and you need to do all of this, you need to be connected with the reality. Reality of what exists and how in this brief moment you are going to make a value addition that is going probably to change the perspective that the audience has in front of you. And the third point, be read. It is not possible to develop a personal brand without being read. Easiest, LinkedIn, Blogger, WordPress, but being read means you write. Before you write, you need to read. Garbage in, garbage out. It means you need to actually read something worthwhile and connect it with your own reality to churn out something original. And that is what is important. So, of course, you need to be read, you need to have personal blogs, and you need to have, of course, social media is one of the other places where your original interactions with the reality is being talked about. So, for instance, in today's session, there was Jamshed Saab. I think he was talking about his personal relationship experiences across various countries in Middle East. And that's the unique part of it. And I was asking him, please do write about that. I think we need that written down. And then there are magazines and books. You see, Jack Welch has written so many books. So can you write books? So if you want yourself to be taken as a leader, you need to be read, because you can only be read if you write something which is your value proposition, in which you excel over the others, and which people will take seriously. And actually, the thing is that when your book becomes a textbook and others are teaching. And finally, now what becomes the leadership identity? And I'll just say again, when we say be seen, be heard, be read, then it is not that you have to be living that brand, that value that you are saying. You should not be acting that brand. Acting is very transparent, and it becomes visible from miles. You see, as a teacher, I know the feeling. There are so many eyes. We are under a microscope, and no teacher can escape the scrutiny of a teacher who is in the shallow waters. So be true to who you are. Don't say anything which you do not represent, which you do not feel, which you do not believe, which does not represent your own self. And remember, this is not self-promotion. This is not self-promotion. And we need to be living our value proposition. And what does that living my value proposition is? That all my relations and my relationships, all my relations and all my relationships, the time that I spend with them should be eking out that value proposition. It should be spreading that value proposition and enveloping anyone and everyone who comes in contact with your value proposition. And it would be happening at the meetings, the consistency of your message, the consistency of your interactions at meetings, conferences, offices, home, visits, hotels, wherever you are. It is actually a 24/7 effort to create personal brands that would actually determine your leadership identity, which people will remember and which people may talk about, and that may become eventually your legacy. But remember, you are not doing it for any of these things. These have to be a side effect of what you are trying to do, because the value is in itself fulfilling, whether it is being recognized or not. Value is in itself an achievement, whether it is seen, heard, or is not heard, is not seen, is not read, and is not there. And that value proposition is for my own self, my own happiness, and my own posterity. Thank you.